Would people listen to God if they actually heard him? Even if you have faith in God and live according to God as a good Christian, I think that people are so set in their ways they would be unlikely to listen properly. A Christian will read the Bible, go to church and keep on praying every day, but they mostly do this by themselves. Their life choices are largely unaffected by God and they live by their own will. This nature of habit, when people fall into the life of following God, is so consuming that I reckon if anything were to interrupt the habit, even God himself, it would not change the course of action of the person, and they would still live on the same regardless. It amazes me how the entry to Christianhood has nothing to do with whether you can hear God. It is all about the road to salvation. You can become a Christian, get baptized, become a member of the church, get involved with leadership, and start preaching on a Sunday without ever needing to listen to God. Religion can be more of a process than any real relationship with the divine. You would think that being able to listen to God is the most important part of faith. It is more worthwhile to have an actual relationship with God than to have a relationship with the religion that surrounds it. There is a huge disconnect between God and religion that you can really only fully focus on one of them. Someone that hears God and listens will always have a greater connection to the truth than the person who has a good reputation in their religion but does not listen. For this reason, I think that people focus way too much on the particulars, on how to live according to God, and forget to consider the actual God behind it all. So I think it is important to take the time and think, would I hear God if he spoke to me? Forget about the communion next Sunday or the midweek prayer meeting. If you're not listening to God, you will never hear him. Does God want us to suffer? If he created this world and made our lives the way they are, then our suffering may be for a reason. It is a popular view among Christians that God has reasons for why anything happens, good or bad. So the time we serendipitously meet our soulmate, or when we fall down the stairs, God has a reason for everything. This is a comforting thought, but often does not make any sense. What is the point in undue suffering? Does it make our lives more meaningful? Does it build our strength of character, or is suffering just a glitch in the matrix and is an unfortunate mistake? I do not look back on times of suffering in my life with fondness. To think they happen for a reason is not an attractive proposition for me. That time I was trying to cut an apple and hurt my thumb, needing a plaster, does not seem to have purpose in the grand scheme of things. So when you consider small amounts of suffering do not appear to have any purpose, then what reason is there for more severe cases of suffering? There are some things in life that you can take value in the strength and willpower it took to overcome them. Suffering can make you a stronger person and can help prepare to face future suffering. This is not sufficient reason for suffering on its own. I think there is a deeper purpose. I think this purpose is all about life having meaning. If everything came easily and there was no suffering, then there would be nothing to endure and nothing to fight for. When you can overcome life's challenges and withstand the worst that life has to offer, you can have a deep sense of determination to value the good parts of your life. That moment of calm in the eye of a storm can be truly valued when you have first experienced the storm. As much as suffering can seem unnecessary, it adds a level of interest to life and gives the times of enjoyment more value. I think that in the same way, when we create stories in feel-good films with an inevitable low point before a happy ending, God has created our lives to follow a similar narrative with its ups and downs. Without suffering, life would be no more than a boring story. Suffering may be the very mechanism that gives our life its true meaning. Does anyone trust God more than themselves? Trusting God comes from a place where you trust yourself to trust God. I am not sure you can ever truly trust God completely selflessly in a way that means you value God more than yourself. For better or for worse, we value ourselves so much that I find it hard to picture a true servant of God, someone that truly only lives for God and not themselves. The typical Christian will grow their faith so they can be saved. This mindset of belief is almost always first predicated on the self before anything else. The reason to believe in God is not for the benefit of God, it is the benefit of you first. It is only when you have faith in God Do you then try to extend your mindset on God first? People will say that God is of most importance to them. Notice here that even when God is of most importance, it is from the viewpoint of the person. No one ever believes in God so that only God can benefit. People like to prioritize God, but I think we all fall short. Does anyone have reasons to believe in God? It is possible to argue for the existence of God. For example, there is the teleological argument that states the universe is intelligently designed from the complex nature of DNA to Earth's suitable climate for life, so there must be a designer of the universe, and this is God. Such arguments give reason for God to exist. This may convince some, but I think that belief in God is not a matter of reason. Believing in God requires a personal connection and compelling experience. The result of this lack of reason means that most people's evidence for God is purely anecdotal. People's beliefs are very subjective, so it is hard to convince others based on your own belief. Everyone has to find God for themselves, and until they do, there appears to be no good reason to believe. On reason alone, God does not present himself. There is no clear evidence that everyone can agree upon to show that God exists. In our world, God is not here physically. A scientific mind can quite easily explain away everything without the need for God. The universe makes sense without God, and we keep on living regardless. However, there are whole churches full of people that are convinced. Why? There must be something real about the personal relationship with God. Otherwise, people would not testify so readily to God's existence. This means that there is something uniquely special about the existence of God. His existence only makes sense to those that believe. This does sound like the whole thing is completely made up, but there is nothing quite like it. The closest thing I can think of that people believe in is Santa Claus. However, people come to their senses beyond childhood and see he does not exist. God, on the other hand, convinces adults as well. There may be no science or reason to support it. People believe in God anyway, even though it might make more sense not to. I think belief in God makes sense. Those that disagree just have not experienced the God that defies reason. There are some things that Christians do not like, evolution for starters. For some reason, the events of the Bible and the idea that the generations detailed since Adam and Eve are all of history, 6,000 years or so, is actually a popular belief. The idea that the scientific method, which is a continually improving approximation of the truth, suggests that the Bible could be wrong here is not a popular belief. It takes a special person to believe that the Bible is the true, undisputable Word of God, and to also maintain that evolution is the closest we have to the truth. Not taking the absurdities of the Bible to be more factual than science is a necessary component of being a sensible person. The question is that, can this type of person also believe the Bible like the rest of Christians do? The answer is a resounding no. The Bible has a grip on people like nothing else. Taking the Bible as God's words means there is no flexibility, no matter how ridiculous the implications of the Bible are. A fundamentalist Christian will have to ignore their intelligence and give in to the religious pressure. This is a fascinating stupidity. Whether it means that our ancestral history is wiped clean by a single book, or the basic laws of physics are forgotten about for a good story, people are relentless in their dedication to their beliefs. I have never heard of anyone coming to the conclusion that the Bible is God's word and must be completely true by themselves. This strange belief is passed on through the generations. It is hard to throw away all science and reason in favor of this fundamentalism in light of the enlightenment of knowledge we now have. Without such explanations like evolution to our existence, it must have been so much easier to believe fully in the Bible. In the past, there is little to stop you being consumed by the stories, and it is the norm. However, nowadays, the believer of the young-aged earth and miracles of Jesus has to really be brainwashed. I do not think you can get to such beliefs through being sensible and thinking rationally. You have to be a complete nutter. They can be found at your local church. What would life be like without the Bible? There might not be a religion. There would be no go-to book for Christians to read and follow. Our whole society would have turned out differently. We might have still developed into the affluent, prosperous nation that we are. So many things have to work in parallel at the same time for progress to be made. With no religion to help us to work for a collective cause, we may have never left the cave. Or not. Everything might just have turned out fine, maybe better. Religion may be the very thing holding us back from the societal development we need to progress. The Bible is such an influential book that without it, who knows what would have happened. More interestingly for me, what would I do without the Bible? I think my main lesson I learned is to treat others how I would like to be treated. The golden rule. Little life lessons like this help me try to be a good person. Also, I do not think I would contemplate God so much. I keep looking at other Christians and see their faith, making me think about my faith. The Bible has made God known to people, and I can appreciate this fact. God makes me think of deeper meaning in life, and I think the Bible has helped me consider that without the Bible, life would not be the same, but I guess God would still exist. We might not be aware of him, though. Is there any worth in trying to understand God? The notion of what it means to be God is quite vague and complex. God is the creator of all life. God is our savior. God is our judge. So many things can be attributed to this one all-encompassing deity. You would think that this could all confuse us to the point where we cannot understand any of it, and yet we all know about God. He is understandable, so we recognize the concept. Even though we can talk to each other about God and we can comprehend the topic, I do not think that anyone has a remote idea of what or who he actually is. People have scripture to read that gives them an idea of God. Without this, I think God would be way more abstract. Instead of God being the Father of Jesus Christ and the source of the Bible, God could be referred to as a universal truth or the essence of reality. We would not go through the motions of religion and keep to the same narrative. We would talk about our own interpretations and have way more freedom to discover God's true nature. No Christian will ever go on a typical journey of faith and come out the other side knowing something about God that they didn't already know. God is taught to us, and we learn the same rough version. This approach to God means there is a common consensus and the same ideas can survive generations. But what it lacks is the personal search for truth. It is only when people are given the freedom to search for their own meaning that reality reveals itself in new ways. I think that it is easy to become comfortable in our beliefs about the nature of God, and we do not dare to question the preconceived ideas. When you think about it, this is not how the most famous followers and servants of God acted. The people in the Bible, those that were arguably closer to God than we can ever be, found out about God on their own. If we want to have a true sense of God, I think we need to open our minds and not let religious dogma get in the way of discovering God for ourselves. Once we can let ourselves think freely and search for the truth, we will most likely get closer to understanding God than we could ever have done before. What makes people trust the Bible? There seems to be a little bit of a circular argument when answering this. I believe in God because of the Bible, and I believe in the Bible because of God. Thinking about this, the reason for trust is not clear. People devote their lives to following the teachings of God through the Bible. They do not stop to question why or how they came to that conclusion. The idea of the Christian God and the events of the Bible are so inextricably linked that finding reason for them separately can prove impossible. What came first, the chicken or the egg? Or in this case, God or the Bible? If you fully believe the Bible, then you will think that it's obvious. God came first, for without God, there would be no Bible. However, the image of God in the mind of such believers is a very result of the Bible. God would not be God if you had not learnt about him through the Bible. So in this sense, you read the Bible first, then the God you believe in materialized. This begs the question whether there exists an immutable, unchanging God outside our own minds. Because if God does transcend us and is its own entity, then it is ridiculous to say anything other than the Bible only exists due to God and not the other way around. Does God only exist as much as we are able to perceive him, or do we just have rough ideas of something that truly exists? For the non-Christian, you'll think that God is a creation of religion and nothing more, but for the Christian, the Bible is a creation of God and nothing else. This is a confusing conundrum, and I think people do not consider the implications of their beliefs. People tend to just read the Bible and believe in God. The sheer trust these people have in this process is baffling. Would people believe it if they saw Jesus? The Bible tells us that Jesus will have a second coming. As much as Christians like to believe in the prophecies of the Bible, I am not sure that they would be so convinced by the real thing. Just imagine if a bearded man came onto the news claiming to be Jesus. My immediate thoughts would be severe doubt and skepticism. It is not conceivable for a person to be God, so much so that I think if God did come down from heaven in the form of a man, that nobody would believe it. People would most likely be offended and say that it is blasphemy against God. No one has the right to pretend to be Jesus. This would be funny because the very God that people believe in could stand right in front of us and we could dismiss his existence. This makes me think how it is impossible to be a mere human and convince people that you are God. Some might argue that this means that Jesus never existed in the first place, so we have every right not to believe in a second coming. But to the Christian that believes so readily in the Jesus of the Bible, might actually join the skeptics and denounce the true Jesus if he was to appear on the news. How then will Jesus convince everyone on his return? He might resort to miracles or the use of his awesome powers. There might be something deep within us that just knows it's him. I think that there would most likely be some that believe and others that don't, just as is the norm. Jesus might come back, and the Christian that spends their time believing now might not even recognize him in person. This means that there are some people not believing in the true Jesus. These people believe in something else. What exactly about being a Christian makes life better? There is a whole world to explore that only having faith can bring. Everything can be viewed through the eye of there being a God. You no longer act alone. There is another perspective. God is also watching. He can see everything we do and can see into our minds. It is possible to act wrongly, not because you think so, but because God deems it to be wrong. We are then more than just ourselves. We are God's creation, and God is always a part of us. There is an external entity examining our every move, and this source of morality can see our morals. Having God watching over us like this adds an extra dimension to life. There is great value in considering God in life. With God in mind, we become accountable for all our actions. From this, a Christian can find a deep sense of moral purpose. They can strive to be good, not according to their own terms, but according to a deeper sense of what it means to be good. We do not merely act alone. We act in God's moral landscape. Everything in life has a moral weight to it. Whenever we do something, we can judge ourselves with God in mind. What would God think if I did this? God can help us improve our morals and reconsider our actions. For example, we might have a natural incline to be selfish, but thinking about God might be the catalyst that makes us be selfless. God could be the difference between helping out a friend in need, even when it is inconvenient. This way of thinking is encapsulated in the form of the perfect Son of God, Jesus. This man is a benchmark of morality for Christians to aspire to. Jesus is God personified and gives an example of how it's possible to act perfectly. This means that there is an objective version of being moral where there is absolute goodness. There is something to work towards. Christians can now consider, what would Jesus do? They can change their ways for the better and aim to please God as Jesus did. Being Christian makes life better because believing in God gives us reason to make it so. The portrayal of God differs greatly from my experience of him. On one side is the awesome, powerful God that can do all things. And on the other side is my normal life, which is mostly without God. I can often feel that I'm missing something. If God created me and I tried to find him, then surely things would just work. I would be able to see and speak to God every day of my life and feel his endless love constantly. But in reality, I can go days without thinking about God and he does not appear obviously relevant to life. This could all be my fault. I do not search enough for God, so therefore I'm not in a position to find him. There's something peculiar about God's presence. For me, God only appears to me when I am not looking. When I try to force it and desire to experience him, I come up short and search in vain. It is only when I least expect it do I have an encounter with God. This fleeting nature of God is somewhat counterintuitive. When I typically think of people that are closest to God, I think about the most keen Christians. That would mean those that try harder get more results when it comes to God. However, this is not even close to being true in my life. I have so little to do with God, I might as well be an atheist. It is only those special moments when I can feel God for real, where I believe in God and think He truly exists. I only feel like I'm missing God because I have experienced Him. At least I can appreciate that I have something to miss. Do we offend God? When we act in ways that are against God's will, we could be annoying Him and cause Him grief. This would mean that we have an element of autonomy and God is not in control of us. Despite the fact that God created us and our environment, we have a sense of accountability that means that we are at fault for wrongdoings. Also, in this case, God cares about what we do enough to affect Him. The strange implication of this is that due to the many different people living at the same time, God can be pleased and displeased simultaneously depending on the person. It is perhaps a mistake to give God human-like traits, such as a state of mood. God may be beyond the ability to have feelings. In support of my idea that God has these feelings is God's anger. At Horeb, you aroused the Lord's wrath so that He was angry enough to destroy you. Deuteronomy 9:8 NIV. This may be a little extreme, but it shows God's capacity to feel. So instead of causing God to get so angry to destroy us, we might say a white lie and just irritate Him enough to shake His head. I wonder how much God is like us in our capacity to feel. We may just be a much smaller reflection of His true being. Our emotions are also God's emotions. I like to think of God as a person, but this too might be annoying God. Do we offend God? When we act in ways that are against God's will, we could be annoying Him and cause Him grief. This would mean that we have an element of autonomy and God is not in control of us. Despite the fact that God created us and our environment, we have a sense of accountability. That means that we are at fault for wrongdoings. Also, in this case, God cares about what we do enough to affect Him. The strange implication of this is that due to the many different people living at the same time, God can be pleased and displeased simultaneously, depending on the person. It is perhaps a mistake to give God human-like traits such as a state of mood. God may be beyond the ability to have feelings. In support of my idea that God has these feelings is God's anger. At Horeb, you aroused the Lord's wrath so that He was angry enough to destroy you. Deuteronomy 9:8 NIV. This may be a little extreme, but it shows God's capacity to feel. So, instead of causing God to get so angry to destroy us, we might say a white lie and just irritate Him enough to shake His head. And I wonder how much God is like us in our capacity to feel. We may just be a much smaller reflection of His true being. Our emotions are also God's emotions. I like to think of God as a person, but this too might be annoying God. Thank you for reading.